In this video, I'll show you how to build an AI-powered lead qualification tool using Go. Hi, I'm Ed Zinda, and this is What the Funk. So today we're going to build a useful AI workflow that can help businesses improve the quality of their leads, which may come through some sort of landing page or campaign. Everything we'll be using will be free and open source. And the best part, even the AI portion will be 100% local using Ollama. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, we'll be using Go. We'll also be using PocketBase as our framework as well as our persistence layer. And if you don't know what PocketBase is, it's like Supabase, except you can host it on your own machine. You can host it pretty much anywhere because you can literally just download a file and just run it on a particular server. It also gives you the ability to extend its functionality through Go or JavaScript by using it as a framework. To talk to our Ollama LLM, we'll be using a tool called BAML, and BAML is great because it allows you to programmatically create prompts, and it helps to guarantee consistent outputs when dealing with LLMs. BAML really shines when using local and small models because normally it's very hard to get consistent and structured outputs from these types of models. But BAML allows you to do that, and I'll show you in this video. Before we dive deeper into the code, if you're new around here and you enjoy things like AI programming, blockchain, anything nerdy, make sure to like and subscribe and to hit that bell notification icon so you can stay up to date whenever I post a new video. With that out of the way, let's get into it. So I'm in an empty directory. Let's go ahead and do a go mod init, and we're just going to call this leads. And then let's create a main.go real quick. Package main, and then we're going to copy and paste a bunch of boilerplate. So this, you can actually get it straight from the PocketBase website. It tells you how to create a Go project that takes the core PocketBase runtime and allows you to extend it. And literally it's just this. And then you can add different functionality a little bit later. So for now, we're going to instantiate a new instance of PocketBase. And then we've got this hook called onServe. So basically whenever PocketBase is started up or whenever our program is started up, we add a new route. And this is just going to be to hold some static files because we're going to create an ingestion form or an intake form for our leads. And this is what our leads are going to use to basically fill out their name, their email, phone number, and what kind of services they're going to request. And then the rest of our project is going to take those leads, analyze them, and decide whether or not they are a good fit for us. So for this route, we're basically going to be looking at a static directory called pb_public. So we need to create that right now. So I've made that directory. And then I'm just going to add a index.html there. And that's where we're going to store our form. And let's open up index.html real quick. And here I'm just going to paste a bunch of HTML as well. And then we're just going to walk through it. I literally vibe coded this HTML because it's not too important for what we're doing, and it's just a simple form anyway. So it's much easier to just say, hey, I need a simple form to whatever coding agent you prefer and tell it what you need. But one specific thing I wanted to add is this PocketBase JS SDK, and it allows us to communicate with our PocketBase instance and store data. Just if you were using something like Supabase, Supabase has its own little SDK that you can add to your front ends to communicate with Supabase. You can do the same with PocketBase. So here's a bunch of boilerplate HTML, and then down here we have our form. So we're going to collect a first name, a last name, email, phone number, company, estimated budget, and then we want them to tell us what they need. And then we can submit that. And then down here in this script section, I asked the AI coding agent to add some validation. So that's all this is right here. These validation rules. Basically, whenever somebody fills out the form, they can't submit malformed data. We want to be able to trust the stuff that's coming in. Over here, we instantiate an instance of our PocketBase client. This window.location.origin is just going to be replaced with the exact URL that we access this site on. So you'll see it in the URL bar when we show it in the browser. Basically, the PocketBase client needs to know where to connect. And then we save some references to the different parts of our form. So we want to save the form, the submit button, and then messages if we want to show error messages, etc. So we've got some helper functions for showing errors, clearing errors, validating. Those aren't too important for this tutorial anyway. More validation stuff. And then we have this event listener. So whenever somebody submits the form, we don't want to submit it like normal, like you would normally with HTML. We want to submit it using PocketBase. So using PocketBase and some JavaScript, we're going to, one, validate everything. If everything's valid, or we'll continue. If not, we'll exit out of this. And then we're going to pull in the values from that form. So we want the first name, last name, email, etc. We're going to save it into this form data. And then we're going to call a collection. And I'll show you a little bit later once we actually log into our PocketBase instance. We're going to create a leads collection. That's where we're going to store all of our leads. We want to create a new lead, and then we're just going to stuff all of that form data in there. And then we show a simple thank you message, yada, yada, yada. And that's basically it. So now we can go ahead and try to run our PocketBase instance. Clear this. If we do go run, we have to do a go mod tidy first. So it's going to download all of our dependencies. So let's try go run main.go again. And this is going to start up PocketBase for the first time after it compiles. To run PocketBase, it has a bunch of built-in commands. So to run it by itself, it's just going to show this help message. To actually start it up, you want to use the serve command. So let's just add serve to that. And when you first launch PocketBase, there are no super users, so no admin user, and you need to basically click on this URL. It's got a unique token, so it allows you to set up the super user, and we're going to go ahead and do that now. All right, so this is the first screen you're going to see when you first log into your PocketBase instance. So we're going to give it an admin email. So let's do admin@whatthephone.com. Give it a simple password. All right, we don't want to save that right now. And so then we're greeted with this dashboard. So we have all this functionality built in. We've got logging, we've got the ability to manage users, but in this example, we won't manage users. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new collection. We're going to call it leads, and then we're going to add a bunch of fields. So we want to add a first name, and then we want to make sure that's not empty. Add another field, last name, not empty, an email. What else did we get? Phone. Company, what a budget, that's going to be a number, and then the actual needs. One thing we're going to do once we qualify our lead, we're going to contact them by sending them an email. We're going to add a Boolean, true or false, that says qualified or not qualified. And then one final field, we're going to call this, it's going to be a date time, and we're going to call this contacted on, and that should be it. So now we have all of the fields we want to work with. We can actually show what the form looks like that we created. So if we open a new tab, we notice we're running on this 127.0.0.1 port 8090. PocketBase by default runs on port 8090. You could also replace this with localhost, but we're just going to use the number right now. We're going to copy this, go into another tab, and here is the form that we created. So we can go ahead and test this form. We'll just do Tony at Starkindustries.com 55555. Let's give a budget of, I don't know, 1 million. And then I need to automate some stuff. All right, we can see that something went wrong. Let's go ahead and check. We can look in the errors. One thing you're going to want to check when you create new collections in PocketBase is the permissions. So we have this only super users can perform this action, meaning only a admin can actually create new records, not some random person. So we'll go back to leads. We'll go back to edit the collection, API rules, and then we want to be able to create. So we're just going to unlock that. So anyone can create a new lead. And because it's not a super sensitive collection, creating new leads is not a huge deal. So we'll save this, go back and try to submit again. And it's submitted. It said, thank you, we'll be in touch soon. Let's go ahead and reload this. And as you can see, we have our new record with everything we need. So the next step is when somebody submits a new lead, we're going to want to analyze this lead and see whether or not we actually want to follow up on that lead. Now, back in our terminal, we're going to need a way to respond to new leads being saved into PocketBase. And PocketBase allows us to do that by using different hooks. I'm just going to paste in a hook real quick. So we've got this on record after create success hook, and we're going to watch the leads collection that we just created, and then we're going to bind it to an anonymous function that takes this core record event. And the cool thing about these hooks is that PocketBase gives you access to the full app instance and also the record that was affected when the hook was called. So when we submit a new lead, for now, we're just going to print out new record and then show the ID of the record. So let's go ahead and save this, clear out our terminal. I'm gonna run the server again. I'm just going to fill out the form off screen, and then you're just gonna see the hook actually being called. Just fill in a bunch of stuff, submit. All right, now you can see that our hook was called after creating a new record. The next thing we wanna do, now that we've got a hook, we want to analyze any new records with AI and determine whether or not this is a lead we want to follow up on. And to do that, we're going to use a tool called BAML. First thing we want to do is install the BAML CLI. And to do that, you just run go install at this URL and install the latest. I've already installed the latest, so it didn't need to download anything. But once we have that, we can run BAML CLI and then init. And that's going to set up all the boilerplate and configuration you need for a BAML project. If we look in our directory, we've got this new BAML source directory. And then if we ls BAML source, we have this clients.baml, generators, and resume. I'm not going to go too deep into what all of this does, but just give you a quick explanation. Clients is how you define different custom clients for connecting to different LLM providers, for example, OpenAI, Anthropic. But BAML also includes a bunch of client configurations out of the box, so you don't even need this file if you don't really want it. It's only for specifying very specific clients for very specific needs. Generators. So BAML itself is not, it's its own programming language, and it's just a way to define LLM prompts in kind of a programmatic way. You'll see when we get deeper into it. And the generators.baml file is just a way to tell BAML how you want to generate code, because BAML takes the BAML files and generates code depending on what kind of code you're running. So in the case of Go, in our example, it's going to generate some Go code that calls BAML and allows you to interact with LLMs the BAML way. If you're running in Python or TypeScript, it would generate Python. It would also generate TypeScript. And then this resume thing is just an example. I'm actually going to remove it because we don't need it. We're just going to create our own. So I'm going to create a leads.baml and we're going to edit that together. So here in leads.baml, I'm going to paste some stuff and then just explain. So the first thing you want to do in BAML is create a data model. And a data model is just a way to define structured output. So when you use BAML, the way you're using it is you're running a prompt and you're telling the LLM, when you respond to me, I want your result to look like this. And this allows BAML to parse that output and then give you a type-safe way to work with that output in your code. So we want to qualify a lead. So we're going to create a qualification data model using this class keyword, give it a name, and then give it some properties. The first property is going to be is qualified. That's a Boolean true or false value. And then a reasoning. Why is it qualified or unqualified? And that's just going to be a string. And you'll see how we use this in a little bit. Next, we're going to create a function. And a function in BAML is literally just a prompt. As you'll see in a minute, it's a way to engineer inputs and outputs to LLMs that's more developer-y, I would say, rather than just raw text prompts. So we're going to call this function check qualification. It's going to take in a string called details, and it's going to return a qualification type, which we defined over here. The next part of your function is the client. So we're going to be using Ollama and Qwen 3, the 1.7 billion parameter model, which is a pretty small model. But as you'll see, it's going to work fairly well. And you can use almost anything you want because BAML supports a huge amount of different clients and providers, especially the popular providers like Anthropic or OpenAI. But in our case, we're going to use Ollama. And then the next part is just a prompt. And this looks like any other prompt that you've probably ever worked with when dealing with LLMs. You give it some examples, you give it what you want out of it. So in our example, we're going to provide it with some details, and we want the LLM to determine if the details of this lead qualify this lead or if the lead is not qualified. So in our example, the criteria are the lead budget must be $10,000 or higher, and the needs of this lead must be primarily focused on automations or AI models. And then we give it a bunch of other stuff in the prompt that coax the model to better understand what we're looking for. So we give it some examples of qualified and unqualified leads. I'm not going to go into detail for any of that. And then down here, if you're familiar with something like LangChain or other LLM frameworks, they give you some templating tools to insert different values into your prompts, so your prompts can be more dynamic. So here we've got this details argument that we defined up here in the function. So that's going to be automatically inserted into our prompt. We have this interesting line right here, show your reasoning, for example, based on da 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 da. And this is a way to get models to spit out a bunch of thinking tokens. Even if the model is not a thinking model or a reasoning model, you can get it to spit out these tokens doing something like this. And this helps, especially smaller models, less powerful models, to come to a better conclusion or to give you better answers. So I've added this at the bottom. And then this variable right here is a built-in variable supplied by BAML that tells the model how to respond and in what format to respond. And you'll see what it actually looks like. It's just a placeholder, but you'll see what it actually looks like when we test this prompt. So we've got this prompt. And the next thing we want to do is create a test. And if you're familiar with any other types of programming in JavaScript, Golang, Python, etc., you build certain functions and you want to make sure that function works exactly as expected. You build what's called a unit test. And the unit test is a way to throw a bunch of different examples at your function, give it a bunch of different inputs, and make sure that the outputs are what you expect. And BAML allows you to do that, except with LLMs, which is not really something that I've ever seen anywhere else. And it's really nice to have this kind of functionality in BAML so you can easily iterate and see how well your prompt is working and see whether or not you need to tweak something. So I'm going to paste in a test real quick, and we're going to call this test qualified lead. And the way you define a test is you use this functions keyword, the functions you want to test. We're going to test our check qualification function. And then you want to set up the arguments passed to the function. And so we only have one argument, details. And details is a string, and this is what our strings are going to look like when we pass them to our function. So the budget's going to be $15,000, and then the need, I want to automate my business. And then we want to assert, using this assert keyword, that when the model returns this result, is qualified is equal to true. And this just references the actual result from the LLM. So let's go ahead and save that, and I'll show you how to run a test. Clear our terminal. To run a test in BAML, use the CLI again, and you just run BAML test. And you can see it's running our check qualification qualified lead test. It's going to take a little bit because it's spinning up or loading the model into memory in my Ollama instance. And you can see that the test passed. So let's go ahead and scroll up a little bit. Now you can see this is the prompt we set up. And you can also see that our argument, our details were inserted. And then here, the CTX output format that we talked about earlier, this is what BAML actually inserts into the prompt for you when you add that into your prompts. And so the model was actually smart enough to just spit out the pure JSON. Sometimes it will spit out a bunch of extra text, but in this case, it spit out the pure JSON and it worked. And BAML was able to parse that, it got the correct result, and it passed. So let's add one more test just for fun. And we're going to do a test for an unqualified lead with a low budget. So we want to make sure that when this is called, the is qualified is set to false. All right, both of those tests passed. So we know our prompt is working pretty well. Next, we want to use BAML in our code. So to do that, we need to generate the code for our workflow to use. So back in our terminal, we can run BAML CLI and then generate. So this generated a BAML client, and the BAML client is what we're going to use to directly interact with our LLM. And to do that, we want to import the BAML client. This is just going to be leads, because that's our package name. So we're going to alias this to B. And when you have that imported, you can literally just call the function that we defined, like it's an actual Go function. But first, we need to get the details from the new record that is created. And so let's create the details string, and that's going to be a formatted string. First, we're going to get our budget, and that's going to be, should be a float, and then the needs, and that's just going to be a string. And so we can get that from the record get float budget, and then we can also call the record and then get string, and that's going to be needs. I think that's correct. And then let's get rid of this. And then next we want to call the BAML client. So we can use check qualification, and we're going to need a context and then the details that we set there. And then we don't need any other options. And let's check what this actually returns. Returns a qualification and a error. So let's just call this result error. We do the standard if error is not equal to nil. Now we don't want to log fail, just log the error. And then for now, we're just going to print the result, whether something is qualified or not. So this is our new hook. It's actually going to call out to the LLM and check whether something is qualified or not qualified. And we're also just going to print out the details, just so you can see the details as I enter them. Let's go and run this. We need to do a go mod tidy, I think. There we go. Let's clear this. Run it again. Let's do the lead qualifier. I'm going to submit the form behind the scenes. We're going to do a budget of $500. Submit it. It's submitted. And you can see the logs. BAML will show you all the logs of the prompts and everything that are being run. And this is actually wrong. So I think what happened is in some countries, if you have a dot, it treats like a comma instead of an actual decimal. So let's update this. And so we're only going to do 2 decimal precision. So it should show up correctly. And if we restart our server, run this again, I'm going to try and submit. And this time it worked correctly. So it correctly determined that this was a $500 budget and that this is not a qualified lead. One thing I do need to do is run this in a Go routine, because it turns out if I'm submitting this, the web app actually waits for all of this logic to finish running before it returns, and that's not good. So if I wrap this in a Go function, it's going to go concurrently, and then my form should return right away. So let's do one more test. Actually, I need to restart this. Do $100,000, and it's submitted right away. And you can see that it came in and it's running against the LLM, and we returned true. That's correct. Now, the next thing we want to do, if a lead is qualified, we want to send them an email. And this is pretty simple with PocketBase as well, because PocketBase has utilities and functionality to easily send emails. The first thing we're going to do, though, is create a way to test this locally so we don't have to sign up for anything to get this working. And we're going to use a tool called MailCatcher. And MailCatcher is like a mock or fake mailing service that runs locally on your machine. And whenever you want to test it out, you can add the details into your application, like you're using a mail service like Resend or SendGrid or something like that. But instead, it's sending to MailCatcher, and all the mail is being sent just on your machine. So you're not wasting any credits, you're not using any API keys, or you're not sending any real emails. And it's a quick and easy way to test that your email functionality in your apps is working. And the easiest way to get MailCatcher running is to use Docker. And we're just going to use this one command. And so you can run this like this. It's going to pull from the Docker Hub and just run this in the background. And then you can go to your browser on localhost on 1080, as I'll show you in a little bit. And it's going to give you a very minimal interface that shows you every email that goes through this server. So here I have localhost 1080 loaded up, and here is the MailCatcher UI. So anytime an email is sent through this mock service, it'll show up here. Then you can read the actual email down here. Now, to use it in PocketBase, we want to go back to our instance. I need to make sure it's running. And if you go to settings and then mail settings, you want to check this use SMTP server. We want to use localhost, and then 1025 is the port. We don't need to set a username or password. We can save the changes. And then if we send a test email to bob@, pop.com. So the email was sent. If we go back to MailCatcher, we can see we have email and we can read it. So it's got HTML, plain text, and then some raw email stuff. And that's that. All right, back in our editor, let's go ahead and get rid of this stuff right here. We want to check if a lead is qualified. So we can check this through the result. The result is qualified. We want to send an email to the lead. And we can do that using PocketBase's built-in email functionality. This is directly from the PocketBase documentation. Let's add that import. So what this does is creates an object of message. We're just going to use the default sender address, sender name that's in our settings. And you can change this in your PocketBase instance whenever you want. The address it's already got this for us. We have an email in there and the subject is, I don't know, let's say hi, and then the name of the person. So that's going to be the first name, and then the body of the email. I don't know, let's just keep it pretty simple. Hi, going to be the first name again. I don't know, let's get started on some automation. You're going to want to put in something obviously a little better, but this is just for demonstration purposes. We want to import this type as well. So we've got our message. We don't need to add any attachments. To send the email, we can simply do something like this. app new mail client, and then send the message. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and restart our server. It's running. I'm going to submit a new qualified lead. I have a budget of $15,000. Going to submit that, and it's submitted. So now it's running against Ollama. You can see the budget of $15,000 here. I need to automate my business, and it correctly determined that this is a qualified lead, and then it sent the email. But I can see some issues here. So I didn't add the substitution like I should have. So we'll just add the first name like that. This should have had a space. We save that, restart, do it all over again. All right, and you see it went through the same way, sent an email. And let's go ahead and check the email in MailCatcher. All right, here in MailCatcher, you can see the first email I sent with the mistakes. So it's missing a bunch of stuff. But here is the correct email. And so we've got the hi, Tony, and then the let's get started on some automations, blah, blah, blah. So the email is working. If we go back to our collections and leads, you can see we have a bunch of test leads. The last thing we want to do, just for completeness, is once everything is done, we want to update the lead record with whether or not the lead is qualified and if the lead was actually contacted. So say, for example, you have a sales rep and they want to go through these leads to double check something. We don't want to contact somebody twice and spam them with a bunch of emails. So the sales lead needs to see whether or not we've already contacted this lead. So let's go back to the code and finish that up. All right, back in my editor real quick, I've added a few things. So up at the top of this block where we test whether or not the result is qualified, I'm going to set the qualified field to true. And then after the email is sent, I'm going to set the contacted on to the current time. And then at the end of this entire go function, I'm going to save the record using the app.save method. So if we go ahead and start our server again, I can see lead. You can see it's submitted. And then we just need to wait a little bit while it processes Ollama. And you can see it ran through the LLM, was qualified. So it sent the email, and then it also updated the record. So you can see that qualified is set to true. And back in my dashboard, I've cleared out all the old records just so we could work with the new code. And you can see the lead that I submitted, it was actually updated with the qualified field and the contacted on field. So we can tell that the lead was actually qualified and that we contacted them by sending them an email. And you can see over here in MailCatcher, we sent a bunch of emails to the different qualified leads. And that's it. That's how to create an AI-powered lead qualification workflow using Go, PocketBase, and Ollama. Now, knowing that you can create these kinds of workflows and use small local models, I'd love to hear what kind of interesting workflows you guys could come up with. If you have any other comments or questions, leave them down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.